Ethiopian Bible.
Yeah, so the Ethiopian Church is a wing of, you have these different sort of overarching denominations of Christendom. You have today Protestants, Eastern Orthodox, Coptic, Roman Catholic, and then the Ethiopian Church.
They say history is written where everyone is looking. Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, the center of prophecy. But what if everything we've been taught is only half the story? What if the most sacred relic in human history, the Ark of the Covenant, left that city 3,000 years ago and vanished? Not lost, but deliberately hidden? Tonight, we follow the trail across deserts and mountains, into a kingdom that defied every empire, preserved by monks who gave their lives to silence, guarded by traditions the West never saw. The question isn't whether the Ark exists. The question is, if it moved, did God move with it? And could the final chapter of history be unfolding somewhere the world has forgotten to look? The Ark that chose Ethiopia. Ethiopia's story does not begin with Christianity. It does not begin with missionaries or colonial conversions or borrowed faith adopted from foreign shores. It begins with covenant, and covenant begins with a queen whose footsteps still echo across scripture and legend alike. Her name was Makeda. History remembers her as the Queen of Sheba, a sovereign whose power stretched across the incense routes of the Horn of Africa, whose merchant fleets commanded the Red Sea trade, whose wealth made neighboring kingdoms whisper in envy.
However, the country that claims the Queen of Sheba most strongly is Ethiopia. Yes, it's a little further from Israel than Yemen. It's also landlocked thanks to the present-day country of Somalia.
She had everything a ruler could desire: gold, influence, armies, and the allegiance of nations. And yet when rumors reached her of a king in Jerusalem whose wisdom could pierce the veil between heaven and earth, she did not send ambassadors to investigate. She went herself. Think about what that journey required. Months of travel across some of the most unforgiving terrain on the planet. Deserts that swallowed caravans whole. Mountain passes where a single misstep meant death. She was not chasing trade agreements or military alliances. She was chasing something far more dangerous. She was chasing the truth. Scripture records her arrival in Israel's royal chronicles. Ethiopian tradition preserves what happened next, the part the Western world has never been taught to remember. For 40 days, Makeda sat at the feet of Solomon, asking questions no one else dared to voice. Questions about the origins of creation, questions about the nature of divine presence, questions about the future God had written for his people. And Solomon answered her as though he were reading from scrolls not yet composed, as though heaven itself were whispering in his ear. But something else happened during those 40 days, something that would bend the arc of sacred history in a direction no empire anticipated. When Makeda returned to Ethiopia, she was not alone. She carried within her the child of Solomon, a son who would be named Menelik, whose bloodline traced backward through David to Abraham and forward into a destiny no prophet had fully spoken. This is where Ethiopia's identity is forged, not as a distant convert grafted onto someone else's tree, not as a later addition to a story, already complete, but as a nation woven into Israel's covenant at the level of blood, lineage, and divine purpose. Menelik grew in the highlands, shaped by mountain faith and ancient mystery. And when he came of age, he did what sons do. He went to find his father. He traveled to Jerusalem to stand before the king who had never raised him, to look into the eyes of the man whose wisdom had drawn his mother across deserts. Tradition says Solomon wept when he saw him, but the elders of Israel did not weep. They trembled. Because standing before them was a young man who carried Solomon's authority in his bearing, Solomon's insight in his gaze, Solomon's claim in his very blood. And they feared what his presence meant for the future of their nation. Fear always distorts truth. Fear always tries to rewrite destiny. but destiny is not so easily erased. On the day Menelik prepared to return home, something happened that would reshape the trajectory of sacred history. The Ark of the Covenant, the gold-covered throne of God's presence, left Jerusalem. Western scholars call it legend.
The Ark of the Covenant.
The Ark of the Covenant is probably one of the best-kept mysteries in the world today. We know according to the biblical description.
Ethiopia calls it transfer. Not theft, but commission. Not robbery, but relocation. Menelik did not steal the ark. He carried it because he was chosen to. And when he crossed back into Ethiopian soil, the covenant crossed with him, never to return. Zion moved. The ark in Africa. To understand the weight of Ethiopia's claim, you must first understand what the ark truly was. In the Hebrew imagination, the ark was not a symbol. It was not a historical artifact. It was not a decorative chest carried through deserts for dramatic effect. The ark was presence, the living, terrifying, world-shaping nearness of God himself. Where the ark rested, God rested. Where the ark moved, God moved. Where the ark was present, Israel prevailed. Where it was absent, Israel fell. So one question should trouble every student of Scripture. If the ark left Jerusalem, did the presence leave with it? Ethiopia. Answers without hesitation. Their answer is not whispered in academic papers. It is proclaimed in chant, manuscript, and memory. Zion is where the ark rests, not where the temple used to stand. Ethiopia is not claiming a relic. Ethiopia is claiming a throne. Consider what has survived in this mountain kingdom while the rest of the world evolved, reformed, and rewrote its traditions. Ethiopian Christians still practice kosher-style fasting, abstaining from foods forbidden under ancient Mosaic law, not as imitation, but as inheritance. Their priests still chant in Ge'ez, a sacred language older than Latin, whose syllables echo the tones of ancient Hebrew worship. Their liturgy is not a reenactment of something lost. It is a continuation of something never broken. Every year, during the festival of Sigd, entire communities ascend high mountains to renew the covenant of Sinai. They are not performing history. They are participating in it, reenacting what Israel once did before the ark, bowing not to a memory but to a presence they believe still watches over them. And then there is the monk. Hidden behind stone walls in the ancient city of Axum, unseen by the outside world, one man gives his entire life to guard the ark. He enters the sanctuary compound and never leaves. He will never marry. He will never walk freely again. His voice grows old, singing the same psalms the Levites once sang in Jerusalem. When he dies, another takes his place. This has continued for centuries, an unbroken chain of solitary guardians keeping vigil over what Ethiopia calls the throne of God on earth. He does not guard a museum piece. He guards a living presence. While Western archaeologists comb through caves and ruins searching for clues, Ethiopia never joined the hunt. They never needed to. They know where the ark is. They've known for 3,000 years. And if this is true, if the ark truly rests in African soil, then every prophecy about Zion, every promise of restoration, every vision of nations streaming toward the mountain of the Lord may be pointing somewhere the West has never thought to look. God's hidden calendar. Time, to most of the world, is a neutral measurement. Numbers on a clock, months arranged in sequence, a calendar inherited without question. But in Ethiopia, time is not a system. Time is a sanctuary. While nearly every nation on earth uses the Gregorian calendar, Ethiopia walks to a different rhythm. Their year does not begin with Roman logic or papal reform. Their calendar is woven from texts the West discarded, from Enoch, from Jubilees, from scriptures preserved in Ge'ez while Europe was still burning heretics for owning Bibles. Ethiopia's calendar runs 7 to 8 years behind the Gregorian count. But to Ethiopian theologians, this is not delayed. This is sacred alignment. They believe the divine does not rush. Prophecy does not bend for the empire. Time itself follows God's rhythm, not Rome's. When the Western world recalculated its calendar to fit political and astronomical priorities, Ethiopia refused. They kept time as the earliest believers understood it, as the first-century church lived it, as Enoch described it in visions the West removed from its scriptures. At the heart of this timekeeping lies the Jubilee, a sacred cycle of 50 years. In ancient Israel, the Jubilee was more than a festival. It was a divine reset, debts forgiven, slaves freed, land restored. The presence of God rolling through the nation like a cleansing wind. After centuries of exile and reinvention, the Jubilee faded from Western practice. But not in Ethiopia. They kept it. They honored it. They structured their entire prophetic expectation around it. And here is the claim that will unsettle comfortable eschatology. Ethiopian scholars believe Christ will return during an Ethiopian Jubilee, not a Western one. This is not sensationalism. It is the natural conclusion of a worldview built around scriptures. The West, no longer reads. If prophecy is aligned to Ethiopian time, then the countdown the world has been watching may be fundamentally miscalibrated. The signs, the seasons, the alignment of world events, everything could be synchronized to a timeline invisible to Western eyes but preserved faithfully in the highlands of Africa. Ethiopia holds a timeline unbroken since the earliest days of the Church. They never rewrote their calendar to match Rome. They never adjusted prophecy to appease emperors. Their time is ancient, original time, prophetic time. And that is why Ethiopia watches with a calmness that puzzles outsiders. They are not guessing, they are aligning. Their calendar is not a prediction, it is a pathway, where God never left. There is a story the world tells about Africa. You have heard it 1,000 times. A story of chains dragged across ocean floors. A story of empires carving borders with bloody hands. A story of famine, exploitation, and fire consuming everything in its path. A continent that became synonymous with suffering, its people reduced to symbols of tragedy in the Western imagination. But Ethiopia never fit that story. And that refusal to fit is precisely what makes its claim so unsettling. While kingdoms around it crumbled beneath colonial boots, Ethiopia remained standing. While the map of Africa was redrawn by foreign powers who had never walked its soil, this mountain nation kept its ancient crown. Italy tried to conquer it twice. The first time, Ethiopian warriors handed them one of the most humiliating defeats any European army ever suffered on African ground. The second time, even under bombs and poison gas, the spirit of the nation refused to die. Within years, the emperor returned. The throne was restored. The covenant continued. The world calls this political resilience. Ethiopia calls it something else entirely. They call it proof. Because in the Ethiopian imagination, survival on this scale is not coincidence, it is called. It is evidence that a nation entrusted with the Ark of the Covenant cannot be destroyed by the hands of men. The same presence that parted seas and toppled Jericho's walls has been standing guard over Ethiopia for 3,000 years. And that presence does not lose wars it intends to win. But here is where Ethiopian theology cuts against the grain of Western understanding. For centuries, the Western Church interpreted suffering as punishment, a sign that God had turned his face away, that sin had severed the connection, that divine displeasure was being measured out in pain. Ethiopia preserved a radically different reading, one whispered in monasteries carved into cliff faces, one chanted in liturgies that have not changed since the days of the apostles. Suffering is not punishment. Suffering is consecration. It is the furnace where gold is separated from dross. It is the fire that shapes a vessel worthy of carrying divine presence. It is the darkness that teaches the eye to recognize even the faintest approaching light. One line from the ancient Ethiopian text, Mysteries of Heaven and Earth, lands like a thunderclap across the centuries. The light of the Lord will return to the land of the black people. This is not ethnic pride dressed in religious language. This is prophecy, spoken by a people who understood that God often chooses the wounded to carry his glory, the broken to become his sanctuary, the forgotten to stand at the center of his final act. Look at the landscape of history and see what Ethiopia saw. Slavery bleeding the coasts dry, empires swallowing nations whole, languages erased, lineages shattered, identities buried beneath foreign names and foreign gods. And yet, through all of it, one kingdom remained, wounded but unbroken, pressed on every side but never crushed, surrounded by fire but never consumed. Ethiopian theologians say that suffering sharpens the spiritual senses. A nation that has walked through the valley of shadow for centuries develops ears tuned to frequencies the comfortable cannot hear. They recognize the footsteps of God because they have spent generations listening in the silence between sorrows. They know the texture of deliverance because they have tasted its absence and survived. This is why Ethiopia preserved what the rest of the world abandoned: the sacred calendar, the ancient language, the 81 books of Scripture, the unbroken liturgy stretching back to the earliest church. These are not the achievements of comfort. These are the fruits of endurance. And if suffering truly is preparation rather than punishment, then Ethiopia believes it has been shaped across millennia for a moment the world has not yet witnessed, a visitation that will vindicate every tear and redeem every wound. Ethiopia's Secret Temple. The world is holding its breath for a sign. You see it in headlines, in documentary thumbnails, in the fevered speculation of prophecy forums across the internet. Everyone is watching Jerusalem. Everyone is waiting for the moment when bulldozers break ground on sacred soil and the third temple begins to rise. The assumption has calcified into certainty. When those ancient stones are laid again, the final countdown begins. The end of history hinges on construction permits and political negotiations in one contested city. But what if the world is watching the wrong site? What if the third Zion was built centuries ago, not raised toward heaven in triumph, but carved downward into the earth in secret? In the highlands of northern Ethiopia, hidden from the chaos of empires and the arrogance of conquerors, there exists a place that defies architectural logic. A place that makes engineers fall silent and historians reach for words like impossible. 11 churches carved from single blocks of volcanic rock, not constructed, not assembled, excavated, as though sculptors began at the surface and carved downward, removing everything that was not sacred until the mountain itself became a temple. This place is called Lalibela, and Ethiopians do not call it a monument. They call it the New Jerusalem. According to tradition, King Lalibela received a vision in the 12th century. He was shown the heavenly city in all its perfection, its dimensions, its geometry, its spiritual architecture, and commanded to recreate it in stone. What followed was a construction project that still baffles modern minds. Churches connected by tunnels and trenches, passageways carved through solid rock, drainage systems designed with precision that rivals modern engineering, and all of it accomplished without scaffolding, without cranes, without any of the tools we assume such work requires. The faithful say angels worked through the night, finishing what human hands began each day. Whether you read that as literal miracle or poetic memory, the result stands unchanged. A complex so vast and so intricate that no army has ever destroyed it, no empire has ever claimed it, no disaster has ever erased it from the earth. This is Zion preserved not by walls but by stone, defended not by soldiers but by sheer endurance, hidden from the world until the appointed hour. Stand inside these churches today, and you will hear chanting in Ge'ez, the same sacred language that has echoed through these corridors for 800 years. Priests in white robes move through rituals unchanged since the earliest centuries of Christianity. Pilgrims arrive barefoot, crossing miles of mountain terrain to kneel on floors carved from living rock. They are not visiting a museum. They are entering what they believe to be the dwelling place of God on earth. Some Ethiopian scholars go further. They argue that the temple visions of Ezekiel, those intricate prophecies Western theologians have spent centuries trying to map onto Jerusalem, may describe a reality already fulfilled, a sanctuary built by divine command, a Zion untouched by the politics of empire, a temple hidden beneath the earth, waiting for the moment when God reveals what he has been preparing in silence. While the world debates blueprints and building codes for a temple that does not yet exist, Ethiopia kneels within a temple carved by faith and guarded by centuries of prayer. While prophecy watchers scan headlines from the Middle East, monks in Lalibela continue their vigil, chanting the same psalms, keeping the same hours,
Ethiopian monks have safeguarded for well over a millennium,
preserving the same presence they believe has never departed. The third Zion may not need to be built. It may only need to be recognized. And recognition in the economy of God often comes at the moment no one expects, the Ark's secret home. For centuries, the Western imagination has been trained to look upward. Every painting of the Second Coming shows the same scene, clouds parting like curtains, angels descending in formation, Christ breaking through the atmosphere with the force of cosmic invasion. The sky is always the stage, heaven is always above, and humanity waits below with necks craned and eyes fixed on the distant blue, expecting God to arrive like a king returning from foreign wars. But what if we have been looking in the wrong direction? Ethiopian prophecy preserves a different vision, one that does not contradict Scripture, but expands it beyond the familiar frame. In the Ethiopian understanding, the Second Coming is not a divine invasion crashing through clouds for the benefit of global cameras. It is something far more ancient, far more intimate, far more terrifying in its implications. It is a revelation from within, God rising not from the sky, but from the place where he has been dwelling all along, presence unveiling itself from the ground that has carried it for 3,000 years. The ark is stirring, the covenant awakening. Light emerges not from above the world, but from within the world, from the very soil that has been sanctified by centuries of prayer, fasting, and unbroken worship. This pattern runs through the entire biblical narrative if you know how to look for it. Moses did not encounter God descending from heaven. He met him in a burning bush rooted in desert ground. Elijah did not hear the divine voice in wind or earthquake or fire. He heard it in a whisper inside a mountain cave. The resurrection did not happen in the clouds. It happened in a tomb carved from stone beneath the earth in darkness and silence before dawn. Pentecost did not descend from the stratosphere. It erupted from a room full of waiting hearts. Again and again, revelation emerges from within, from the midst, from the place where presence dwells. And Ethiopia believes it has been that dwelling place for millennia. One line from their ancient texts carries the weight of everything they have preserved. The light of the Lord will return to the land of the black people, and the nations will bow toward his mountain. This is not nationalism dressed in religious language. This is geography of covenant. A map drawn not by empire but by presence, not by politics, but by the movement of the ark across ancient ground. If the ark rests in Ethiopia, if Zion is carved beneath Lalibela, if sacred time flows differently in the highlands, then the return of Christ may not be an event imposed upon the world from outside. It may be a revelation unfolding from the center of God's chosen dwelling, quiet at first, like dawn breaking over mountains, then undeniable as the light spreads across the earth. Perhaps Christ returns not to the place where he ascended, but to the place that never let him go. Perhaps the world has been watching the sky while God has been stirring beneath forgotten ground. The ark may rest in silence, but its story is far from finished. Ethiopia's mountains hold whispers older than empires and secrets that could reshape everything we thought we knew about faith, power, and history. If the world has been watching the wrong place all along, then what else have we been missing? And when the next chapter unfolds, will we recognize it, or will it rise quietly, beyond our maps, beyond our expectations?